Hello and welcome to How Is This Legal? I'm Kyle Lorraine, I'm your host, and we are very excited to have you here today. Today, me and my guest, Mr. Sean McGarry, who is a classmate and a good friend of mine, will be going over immigration. We'll be talking about some of the current laws and systems that are in place, why some of those current laws and systems are in place, and what are some common sense solutions to fix what is becoming a growing national problem. We really hope you enjoy the show, and thank you again for joining us.
Welcome to How Is This Legal? Where in each episode we crack open the books to find outlandish legislation and regulations that make you ask, how is this legal? If you like what you hear, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with your family and friends. Here to break down what these laws mean to you is your host, Kyle Lorraine.
Today we're going to be talking about some different immigration issues. I know this is an area that is very near and dear to him, so I'm going to let him explain a little bit about his background with this area and why it's so important to him. Sean, welcome to the show. Glad to have you.
Hey, buddy. Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it. Happy to be here.
So I understand that you did some work with immigration. Was it before coming to law school, or was it while you were already in law school over the summer?
Yeah, so a little bit of both. Immigration started actually kind of by surprise. I kind of fell into it. I was in Chicago. I went to Loyola University in Chicago, and like everybody, I'm sure a lot of my classmates, maybe you were in this position. Once I graduated, I was like, what am I going to do? What the hell am I going to do for a job?
Definitely.
So I was volunteering at a nonprofit in Chicago on the north side called Centro Romero. They do some great things. You can check them out on their website. And they needed somebody who spoke Spanish and who wanted to help out with a new recent immigration development that had really created a big demand and need for work. And that program was called DACA, and it's quite well known right now because it's pretty... a large part of what's going on with the proposed immigration reform. Anyway, so I started working within there, and it was a really, really cool experience, and I was able to really get some great knowledge as far as immigration goes, and also really connect with the immigrant population in Chicago.
So what kind of things did they have you doing with the program?
So basically, they wanted to hire me for DACA. That was it. Specifically DACA. And that's all I would do. From when I got there to when I left, there was people waiting in the room just trying to file this immigration application, this immigration benefit known as DACA.
That's really interesting. So you're pretty familiar with the whole like inner workings of that program.
Yeah, definitely, because I was doing it all day, and it was a really cool experience.
Would you mind explaining a little bit about sort of how the program works? Because I'm not too familiar with it, and I know it's sort of a buzzword in the media and whatnot with the whole repeal of it. So I'd be interested to see how the components kind of fit together and how it functions.
Yeah, sure. So DACA is basically an acronym. It means Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and it was an executive order in 2012 created by President Obama to really address the illegal immigration situation, because we all know that it is problematic, and there are a large amount of undocumented immigrants within this country, reaching upwards of 11 million. But the idea behind the executive order was to have a common sense approach to addressing illegal immigration, but it was specifically aimed at, we don't want to necessarily punish the kids who had no say in coming with their parents who came illegally.
Mm-hmm.
So the program was basically a work authorization program. It didn't lead to citizenship. It didn't lead to benefits as far as social welfare, anything like that. It simply was here to defer their status, right? Defer deportation within immigration and give them a ability to be here legally in terms of being able to work. Again, it didn't lead to any naturalization, which is essentially citizenship or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So the requirements for the program were you had to be at least 15 years of age to apply for the program. Okay, you have had to have entered the United States before you were 16, as I said, and you had to be under 31 years old on June 15th, 2012. You also had to show that you were physically present in the United States from June 15th, 2007 until now. You also had to show some physical presence, proof that you were here on June 15th, 2012. And you couldn't have any felony criminal background, anything like that. You couldn't have, if you've been convicted of one felony or 3 or more misdemeanors, you couldn't apply. And you also had to show that you were in school, you either had your GED or that you had your high school diploma.
Okay. So with that program, as I understand it, being sort of repealed and taken away, how does it, so what is the, I guess, the process you would go through now if you were one of these, they refer to them as dreamers, right? So if you were one of those individuals, what are your options now that this is no longer a thing?
Well, that's the interesting thing, because as we know, being here in law school and people who are listening who aren't in law school but who are maybe familiar with the concept, an executive order can be repealed by a subsequent president. It's nothing made by Congress, so it's not set in stone, right? So it's kind of vulnerable in that regard. And I think that was the president's idea when he made it, that, you know, the intention was, okay, this is a temporary thing. Hopefully Congress will make a law of it, right? But essentially got repealed, and now it's in limbo. It's you can't apply for it anymore. So what happened is there was about 700,000 people who got received the DACA benefit essentially, and now that pool doesn't have that benefit anymore. So they're kind of sitting here in limbo land.
Really? So these were people that were actually had applied for it, gone through the process, and now they don't get the benefit of it anymore because the program doesn't exist?
Exactly. Yeah, it was repealed.
That's crazy. Because I didn't know that. Mm-hmm. I thought it just cut off people from future applications. I didn't realize that it did something in a way of the people that had already applied and gone through.
Yeah, well, the people who did take advantage of renewing it recently still have the benefit of still being able to have that eligibility for a certain period of time. But as far as accepting future applications and people who have to reapply for it, it's gone. So I guess maybe to have the listeners kind of get an understanding of what happens, like as those guidelines that I said that you need to be able to qualify for it, you send like a big application off. And one of the interesting thing is the physical present requirement that you need to show from June 2007 until now can be anything. Most commonly, you'll use school records, right? Transcripts, but you can be quite creative with it. And I guess that's what we're here as law school trying to be as far as creative, you know, trying to find ways that we can demonstrate to immigration that that person was here. We've used text message records. We've used Facebook posts, photos that have the little timestamp on the corner.
Those still exist?
Yeah, I know. It's crazy for sure. But you would put this application together, and then you have to pay a fee to immigration, $380 plus $85 for the fingerprints, so they can run the background check through the FBI database. You send the application off, and then in a couple weeks, you get a work permit. So that would be eligible for 2 years. Every 2 years, you would reapply, and you'd go through the same renewal process. It's not as extensive as the initial application process, but the main thing that they're checking for is, do you have a criminal record? So all in all, the program was all about having this accountability aspect. You know, it wasn't like we're just handing these work permits out like hotcakes, but it's just we want to make sure that, you know, we don't want to necessarily punish the kids who had no say in coming here illegally. And we don't also want to have people who have any criminal background. So
sure. So just sort of backing up in terms of how we got to this point, because obviously this executive order was a response to what many people consider to be a broken system. And I don't know your thoughts on that. I know, judging by sort of your views and whatnot, it's probably a thought you might have is that the system could be improved, should be improved, and has been broken for a while. So I know that the stuff leading up to this in terms of like the major legislation was the IRCA in the Reagan era, and then the IRA in the Clinton era. So I was hoping you could sort of explain, I guess, both of those in terms of how the Clinton era changed the Reagan legislation and what that effect had in terms of like down the road 20 years later, 22 years later, I guess, from the Clinton one.
Yeah, sure. So the 1986 program by President Reagan was advocated by him. It went through Congress, so it became law. But it was essentially known as amnesty. At that time, we had an illegal immigration issue, but it wasn't nearly as big as it was today. So the idea was, how can we really have a response to this? It's like, well, we need to address the illegal immigration issue. What are we going to do? So it did two things. One, it made it more difficult for U.S. employers to be able to hire undocumented workers, because what a lot of them were doing is they knew that the status was, in favor for them as the employer, so they could use that to pay them less money, essentially. Mm-hmm. And also, that would take jobs away from Americans as well, right? So that penalized U.S. employers who did engage in hiring undocumented immigrants with financial penalties. So you might be familiar with what's called I-9.
Yes.
Okay.
I've heard of it before. I don't know a whole lot about it. But
yeah, well, that's what created was based off of the IRCA program. So now employers, even today, if you're not a U.S. citizen or if you don't have a work authorization in the U.S., you'll need to file an I-9 just to demonstrate with the Department of Labor that you have the ability to work.
Okay.
So that was the one side of the program to really address from preventing the hire of illegal workers in terms of having the employers potentially have that as a bargaining chip to pay them less money and also take jobs away from Americans. The other side was to say, okay, well, we've got this huge amount of illegal immigration. How are we going to deal with it? We can't just round them up and throw them out of the country, They've got lives here. They pay taxes in terms of sales tax and create businesses and engage in the economy in that regard. So essentially what that did was, if you were physically present in the United States from January 1st of 1982 up until 1986 when the program was made, and you didn't have a criminal record, similar with the DACA thing, you couldn't have a felony or 3 or more misdemeanors, seems to be a common theme here,
Yeah.
You could be able to apply with immigration and you could get a green card. And that green card is a prerequisite to become a U.S. citizen.
Okay.
So, all in all, about 2.7 million people were granted this benefit. And, it was a huge win for the immigrant advocates who wanted to have amnesty and really have a common sense approach for this program. And so there were quite a lot of praise and so forth within the IRCA program, and that was in 1986. And 10 years later, 1996, it kind of took a switch as far as nothing happened with those individuals. But what happened is that with President Clinton and the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996 wanted to make the illegal immigration issue much more, I guess you could say, controlled and more enforced and so on and so forth. So they created new things, really expanding the criminal aspect of what could make a person eligible to become deported for a particular criminal offense, and also implemented something called expedited removal, which has some procedural due process issues, because if someone was undocumented and they came to the U.S., they could just essentially, the immigration officer, upon determining that they were here illegally and didn't have papers, would not be eligible to go through the normal removal process, which would require them to be issued a warrant, which would require them to go through an immigration judge to present their case and get removed. Essentially, it was a way to really expedite the removal process.
Mm-hmm. And what I thought was interesting about that, and reading some of the stuff on that program, was that illegal immigration and the amount of legal immigrants skyrocketed because, in large part, because the border security got so much tighter, because they were releasing and giving the immigration folks so much more funding. So the border security was much tighter. So people that used to come in and out from Mexico that would work in the United States and then reside in Mexico, that number declined significantly because people are concerned about them coming here and trying to legally immigrate. But instead of going through the process of going through the border, they just started running the gauntlet of the border fence and sort of, as the author put it, hunkering down because they didn't want to have to deal with all the heightened scrutiny and everything that they were dealing with at the border just to go and do their job, which is kind of crazy because you think that, you know, in their mind, you know, if they up the process and up the amount of people that they're deporting, it's going to, you know, scare enough people from coming here and trying to stay here illegally, but it had the complete opposite effect, which I found pretty interesting, really.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, these things are supposed to have a certain objective, and sometimes it backfires. You know, it's kind of like when you legalize certain substances, or, you know, I guess with the whole alcohol situation, you know, when you have more regulation and restrictions on it, I mean, it's kind of backfires and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
you know, we kind of see that with the drug issue right now. So, I mean, it's not a perfect solution by any means, but definitely is really interesting as far as the 1986 act, which was led by President Reagan, had a completely opposite kind of agenda and focus than the 1996 program, which was much more geared towards enforcement, which makes sense because within that time, illegal immigration had really gone up, and it was really a way to kind of cut the red tape. That's what the whole thing with the expedited removal thing was, because, you know, in all honesty, there is a quite big backlog with the whole removal process. You know, it's not quick. I mean, even we see it within the state court system or the federal court system. Cases aren't getting turned over really quickly. You know, sometimes you have to wait a long time to hear your case. And within that interim period, there's resources that need to be, you know, expelled and so on and so forth. So it was definitely a way to really increase the removal process. So, I mean, in that regard, it makes sense, but it definitely didn't have an end-all, be-all, because here today we still have an immigration system that is not perfect. It's quite broken. It needs to be fixed. So
yeah, and it makes you wonder, too, because another component of the 1996 Act under Clinton was that he sort of was under pressure to kind of sign whatever came to his desk in regard to the immigration issue because it was so, it still is politically charged. So it almost makes you wonder what we could accomplish if we didn't have this red versus blue, you know, argument all the time and the consideration every time that we're making something like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good thing you say that, Kyle, because 1996, that was kind of a close to an election year, I'm pretty sure. So I think, yeah, because 2000 was I'm pretty sure, is that Bush and Gore? 2000?
Yes.
Yep. So, I mean, who knows if it was based on personal preference, or was it based on trying to get some votes from the other side?
Or
who knows?
Or if that was like a compromise for him getting elected, you know, that was the way for the Republicans to sort of get a win there.
That's definitely a good point.
So, what's on the horizon now with DACA being repealed by Trump? Do you think we're going to see an executive order from Trump in this respect? Do you think we're going to see Congress try to get some legislation passed that would be a more permanent solution?
I don't think that an executive order is going to happen, because the whole point of repealing that was a way that was a disagreement with that whole process. Mm-hmm. You know, I totally understand the approach, and that's what we learn in law school as far as laws should be made through Congress, right? Totally understand that approach, because that's what, you know, the Constitution outlines and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's going to be an executive order as far as DACA goes, but we have seen executive orders made by President Trump to address immigration, and we can talk about that after. But the current immigration proposal is President Trump is sympathetic to want to get some legalized situation with the DACA kids, you know. At the same time, he has certain agendas that he wants to meet. Specifically, he wants to get rid of certain aspects of immigration that he doesn't agree with. So he wants to mainly have $25 billion in the border wall as a fund set up to be able to have the border wall constructed, and also implement much more border security on the southern border and also the northern part of the border as well. So as far as DACA goes, he's going to want to have a system similar to what the executive order was, but it's actually going to be much much more expansive. So it could create 1.8 million people to be eligible. That's a million more than the actual DACA current active DACA recipient. So in that respect, it's a win for the dreamers, as they call them, but it's also a win for the Trump administration, who wants to have that border wall and who also wants to have tighter security.
So you mentioned which all that stuff's just is really interesting, and I know the border wall is something that obviously he wanted. It was a big pillar of the campaign, but I didn't know that it was planned to be put at the northern border too. Is that a problem? Do we have a lot of people that come through Canada, or I guess maybe leave the United States to go to Canada?
Well, the large amount of legal immigration comes from the southern border. Mm-hmm. So as far as the focus of the wall goes, I'm pretty confident that is where the wall itself is going to want to go. But there's also border security that wants to go happening on the northern border as well.
Gotcha.
If you have it all on the southern border, that would be
a no-brainer. You could just
an
go
open
around.
door for the northern border. But we see, as far as illegal immigration from Canada, for example, is much lower, just because the economy is a little stronger,
Mm-hmm.
There versus other Central, South, and Mexico and Central American countries. There tends to be a higher rate of poverty and higher rate of corruption, and that's kind of one of the ways in which people are coming here, is just to take advantage of an opportunity to work when there is no work there in their country.
Awesome. So the one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the whole cancellation of removal process that you had mentioned a couple days ago when we were kind of getting ready for this. Could you explain how that process works? Because, I was born here, my whole family was, so I've never, and I haven't done any work with immigration, so I'm not too familiar with how the sort of the inner workings of it. And I didn't know that the whole cancellation of removal process was a thing, because if when you explain it, you'll see why it's kind of a sort of a strange process, because you're kind of putting yourself out there. But could you kind of dive into that?
Yeah, sure. It's an interesting benefit, something that a lot of people aren't familiar with, but it's a way in which it makes sense from the name of the benefit itself, cancellation of removal. When we think of removal, just think of it being synonymous with deportation. But you're essentially canceling you being deported. So there's two different cancellation of removal categories. One is for people who are here undocumented, who don't have any legal immigration status. The other is for green card holders, which I think that's maybe a good segue to talk about what specifically a green card holder is.
Sure.
So a green card holder is a legal permanent resident. Before you can become a citizen, you have to be a green card holder. For example, I'm, an Irish citizen, and I meet a girl while I'm studying abroad here in the U.S. We fall in love. I get married to her. She's a U.S. citizen. She files the paperwork for me. I get the green card because I'm married to her. Obviously, we have to be legitimately married. Immigration is going to want to check that, because immigration fraud for marriage purposes is an issue, and they want to address it. But because I've been married through a U.S. citizen, I only have to be a green card holder for 3 years before I can be eligible to apply for citizenship.
Okay.
And the alternative, say, for example, I'm a Venezuelan baseball player, and I've got some extraordinary talents, and I qualify under a specific employment-based category, which is the EB-1. It's there for people in the top fields of the arts, the sciences, athletics, so on and so forth. So these are like the people who, like the Britney Spears, the Beyoncés, the
Justin
Bieber's, exactly. The people who are on the top of their field, they would be within this category. So they would be eligible and get that. They would have the green card, but they would have to wait 5 years to be able to apply for citizenship. So if you get your green card through marriage, it's simply you have to wait 3 years before you can apply through citizenship. You get your green card through other ways, any other way. And there's a lot of other ways. It's pretty complicated, broad field immigration, but it's interesting, exciting. It's always changing. You have to wait 5 years. So a green card holder is close to being a U.S. citizen, but there are restrictions. So a green card holder, you can work here, you can live here. You don't even have to become a citizen. There's an expiration date on the green card, but that simply is paperwork that you have to file, more money for the government that you have to pay, and you just get it renewed. So it's like a driver's license.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't go away. I mean, obviously, unless you get in trouble, right? But if it expires, you just have to go through a process of applying for it again. So you can stay here. You can travel outside of the U.S. as long as you want. The only thing is you have to be careful from being outside of the country too much, because when you do apply for citizenship, they're going to want to see all of your trips outside of the U.S. and how long they were. And the reason why they're doing that is because they're wanting to say, okay, do you really want to become a U.S. citizen? Because all these trips and all the time you stayed out of the U.S., it could be considered abandoning your green card, and you're really not demonstrating that you want to become a U.S. citizen.
So you really have to walk the line for those few years, whatever category you're in.
Yeah, you're not off the hook until you're a U.S. citizen. I mean, you and I, we can't be deported. Someone who was here illegally who became a U.S. citizen can't be deported. Once they're a U.S. citizen, immigration, you don't have to deal with them anymore. You have to deal with, I guess, the other...
There's plenty of other people you got to deal with.
Bureaucracy, yeah. So, cancellation removal for a green card holder. Again, you can still get in trouble. If you have a green card, doesn't mean you're off the hook. So, for example, if you get a felony or any drug-related things, then you're going to get placed in deportation proceedings, right?
So is that, just real quick, is that any felony, or does it have to be if it's a non-violent drug offense, is it different than, I guess drug offense is probably just as bad in the eyes of the government, but if it's, if it's something non-violent, like say maybe grand theft or something like that, is it what am I trying to say here? Strict liability, where it's if you get a felony, then you're out, or is it if it's a violent felony, it's a different consideration than a non-violent felony?
Yeah. So specifically with this category, there's aggravated felonies, but the idea is if you have any felony, you could be ineligible for the program.
Okay.
Obviously, there's caveats there. I mean, that's why they hire lawyers to find the loopholes and so on and so forth. But as far as the general aspect goes, it's kind of going back to what we're seeing with the commonality as far as crime goes that immigration sees with the whole DACA thing and with the other ideas. If you have a felony, if you have more than 3 misdemeanors, or if you have any criminal record, that you could be subject to problems with immigration. So if you are in removal proceedings because you've committed a crime as a green card holder. Say, for example, I worked on cases where, as a paralegal, I'm not a lawyer here, where we had somebody who had some marijuana possession, just simple marijuana possession, and nothing happened. It was a criminal offense that they got it addressed. They dealt with it. A couple years later, they were traveling from their home country back to the U.S., and as soon as they went into the airport to go through the process, that came up. That drug offense came up.
So that came up like on TSA screen?
Yeah, exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so then because of that, they got placed in removal proceedings, right? And what that is, it's you're given essentially a document. It's like you're being served with this thing called a notice to appear. It's like, all right, you're being placed in removal proceedings because you did this, which violates X part of the statute. You have to come to immigration court on X date to plead your case. And so the person has the ability to address that, okay? Because again, they're in removal proceedings, right? But they got a green card. So this is called cancellation of removal for LPRs. LPR is simply legal permanent resident. When you hear that, just think green card. So you have to obviously be a green card. You have to show that you've been here continuously for 7 years. And you have to have had your green card for not less than 5 years, and you cannot have committed an aggravated felony. So if you have done that and you can demonstrate your case, then the judge there can basically get rid of that, not your drug criminal offense that put you into the immigration proceedings, but they can get rid of you being deported, essentially.
So if I was in that situation and were to file that, about how long do you think it would take me to get in front of the judge? Because from what I understand, the courts are pretty backed up as far as, especially with respect to this particular proceeding.
Yeah, so that's the thing. I mean, that's one of the things with immigration reform. They're wanting more resources to have more judges and being able to really expedite the process. So yeah, I mean, I can't give you a ballpark figure about how long you would wait exactly, but it's not going to be a week. It's not going to be 2 weeks. Or not going to be a month. I mean, you could wait a good amount. I mean, what that would mean is you're on notice that you have to appear on this date so you can go about your life, living in the U.S., working, doing what you got to do. But you still have to know in the back of your mind, like, oh, I need to, get my case going because I'm going to have to go in front of the judge and argue my case.
That's got to fuck with you to have that hanging over your head.
Totally. I mean, but it's something you got to do. I mean, by, I guess being objectively here, you got to be extremely careful if you're an immigrant. I mean, you're not off the hook until you're a citizen. So, I've got some immigrant buddies, and if we go out partying or whatnot, I'm like, you guys cannot even put yourself in, even if you got like a disorderly conduct, or even if you got like a drunken in public or something, or a DUI. It's not an end-all be-all, but I mean, it's something that you're going to have to deal with, So you really kind of have to walk that tight line, that tight rope as an immigrant until you're a citizen, essentially.
That's crazy. So with the, so for the cancellation of removal process, I don't know if we covered it too much, but the extreme hardship sort of component of it, does that apply if you're not an LPR, or you're not holding the green card? Then you would have to prove the extreme hardship, and that would be extreme hardship to someone else by you leaving, correct?
Yeah. So again, there's two categories. The one we just talked about was the cancellation for the green card holders. That's one aspect. The other aspect is cancellation of removal for essentially if you're here illegally or undocumented, right? So that's a substantially higher bar. You have to show essentially you've been here not 7 years like the cancellation for the green card holders, but you've got to show you've been here for 10 years continuously. And a continuously present is something that we continue to see, because we have to show immigration that we've been here. And again, the same type of proof and documents that I explained with DACA, as far as anything is fair game that shows that you've been here continuously, right? So you need to show continuous presence in the United States for 10 years. You need to show good moral character. And, Kyle, you might ask, what the hell does good moral character mean?
That's my next question.
Well, again, it's quite broad. So if you're here illegally, say, for example, I've been here legally 10 plus years, but, I kind of want to go out and party, and I had a few drunken disorderlies or a DUI or got in a fight or something like that. That's the kind of the good moral character that they're really wanting to not happen, essentially. So it's a really high bar that they're setting. And obviously, the good moral character, it's really broad. I mean, as far as what it entails, there's so much that goes into it. But generally speaking, if it's a crime that could be construed as subjecting you to not be a person of good moral character, then it probably is the type that they are going to be concerned about and viewed. And then the third part is, if I had to leave, I'm going to have extreme hardship. And that's not extreme hardship to anybody, but it's extreme hardship to immigrants who have legal status here, being LPRs, like a LPR spouse, or a U.S. citizen spouse or child. So the overall scheme of the Immigration Nationality Act, which is creating all of these benefits, is family unification, right? So that's one of the large aspects of that section. So again, if you're going to be deported, you have to argue extreme hardship. And the way that can be argued is, hey, I'm the worker. I'm the one who works in my family. My wife stays at home. My kids are in school. If I'm gone, they've got no money. Or if I'm gone, they got to come with me. And my kid doesn't know how to speak my native language. They've never been to my country, because I'm here undocumented. I've never taken them. I've never left the country. And I mean, it's quite broad as far as what you can argue. But the way that case would be is that you've just got supporting documentation, affidavits, financial records showing that, hey, if I'm gone, my family is going to be affected in X way. And again, it can be financial, it can be health. Maybe I have a sick kid, and if I'm not here, their health's going to get worsen or something like that. So, I mean, all in all, it's kind of like a way to really be, I guess, humane in the whole idea of someone making a mistake. And in this regard, if someone's here legally, okay, well, we understand you're here legally, but we're going to give you an opportunity to plead your case. But it's a risk because you're essentially putting yourself into immigration. You know you're here illegally, and you're saying, hey, okay, I know I'm here legally. Well, I got no other option. There's nothing here for me. I want to try my case. So, I mean, the reasoning is you've been here 10 years. You've got the extreme hardship qualifying relatives or the people that you can plead your case for, and you're a person of good moral character, then it's something you consider. But like with any of these benefits, I mean, you should always speak with a experienced immigration attorney because the consequences can be quite severe. You might have an idea that you want to cancel your removal, but if you screw it up and don't do it the right way or talk to somebody who doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about, then you could get your ass thrown out, and that can have some pretty serious consequences. So
yeah, it definitely seems like you're playing with fire whenever you do that. And like you were saying, if you're a person that's bringing yourself in front of immigration and going through this process, you're pretty sure you have a claim you're going to win on. You meet the prima facie. People are going to suffer extreme hardship. You have the green card, whatever. One of the questions I'm pretty curious about is with the first prong for the documentation. I know you said you can get pretty creative in how you prove that in terms of text messages or maybe Facebook posts or whatever. So with the continuous for 10 years, you need to prove do they do it like you need to show a text message back and forth with like a location stamp inside the United States for every day? Or is that could you do it if you maybe had once a week or how would you go about that? You just bring a box of records in, a box of pictures from Facebook with timestamps and locations or?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. Usually it's evaluated one per month. Okay. So it's month to month, but if you don't have everything month to month, that's okay. So say, for example, you have taxes. Okay, a tax, federal income tax. You might be saying, well, how are they doing that if they're here legally? Well, I mean, there are ways to get fake social security numbers and creative ways that certain people know how to,
I imagine it's not that difficult to get something like that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. But something like that, even though it's a fake social, I mean, it can still be proved that you've been here. I mean, if you made, I don't know, $30K on your, tax return, then that's sufficient evidence that you were probably working here the whole year. But you can also use individual pay stubs. So yeah, it doesn't have to be day by day. It can be month to month. Even if there's a few gaps, that's okay. But the way that the information is presented, it's not just loosely given to the judge, right? Because you want to cater to the judge because
he's not going to want to pick through all that.
Yeah, it's a discretionary benefit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that the judge has the power through the executive branch to really say yay or nay to letting this person have this immigration benefit. So likely the immigrant would go with an attorney and have all the appropriate immigration forms from immigrant's website filled out and all the stuff organized with exhibits and just give it to the judge, flagged, boom, boom, boom. Again, like if anything, you're making it easy for the person viewing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like what we learn in law school with writing essays. You don't have to have the best arguments, but if you can
hit all the points,
even transitional words, and if you have it in a few short paragraphs, I mean, make it easy for the person, right? So if you do that, no guarantees like with anything with immigration, but you're definitely at an advantage if you have everything nicely organized there.
So in terms of like future changes or maybe a future executive order or legislation, what in your opinion would be the best sort of, I guess, a step in the right direction, or maybe even if you have maybe a more comprehensive plan in mind of what you think might be a good remedy to the solution or a good remedy to the problem we face now with, there's a lot that we've covered here, but What do you think would fix this?
That's a tough question. I mean, I don't know if there's any perfect solution, even with common sense proposals, there's definitely the other side that has an issue with it. I mean, I think the immigration issue is way too political. And I'm not saying that as a political statement. I just think, illegal immigration is not going to be completely fixed. I mean, sorry, people that think it might be completely fixed, but it's not. And part of the reason why is about 40% of illegal immigration is not from crossing the border. It's from coming here legally and overstaying the visa. So I come here as a visitor.
No shit.
Yeah, that's crazy. I come here as a visitor. I'm
that.
wanting to just come see the Grand Canyon. I want to go to, I don't know, eat some restaurants in the U.S. or see some national parks or whatever. And my visa says I have to leave by X date. Well, I say, hell no, I'm not leaving. I'm staying. I got family here. I want to work. I love the U.S., and they just never leave, right? And so that's 40%. So I'm not trying to get political here, but I'm thinking like, how's a wall going to fix that? I mean, the deficit's already quite large, and $25 billion is quite substantial on top of the cost that's going to take to maintain it. So I don't know if that's the best approach, I think it's tough. You can't put monitors on everybody because there's going to be maybe some constitutional issues with that. But I do think the DACA approach was a common sense approach to address illegal immigration. It was not affecting the idea behind it. We're not going to affect the kids, right? It's not. They had no choice in the matter. They got brought here by their parents, okay? But I don't think that, we continue to be a great country. We've got a great economy. We've got great jobs. And there's definitely a blessing with that. But I guess if you want to say on the curse side, it's that's what is facilitating a lot of I guess you could say undocumented immigration, because they're wanting to come here and like everybody would, I always tell people when I talk, I got the lottery ticket, being born in the U.S. because I don't have to deal with any immigration issues. But people, I don't know, man. I mean, I feel like I'm a driven person. I feel like, Kyle, you are too, and all our other colleagues at the school. If we were born in a country that didn't have, shit for jobs and there was no opportunities and corruption, I would consider maybe wanting to come here, because it's got that stereotype of being a good country, which it is, and there's some, it's the land of opportunity. So I honestly don't know the correct answer for that. I think these benefits available are a positive because it creates a sense of accountability. You're not just handing benefit out like hotcakes. You're putting the applicant through a process of having to demonstrate that they're not a criminal, because that notion is agreed on both sides, whether you're Republican or Democrat or third party or whatever. They're wanting to deport felons, not families, right? So I think that's a non-political statement that you're not going to offend anybody by agreeing with that. But having these benefits there, I think, is good because, again, it creates a sense of accountability, but also it creates some revenue, even though a small amount of revenue, but you have to pay to be able to apply for these benefits.
Definitely. I think sort of going along with that, I agree with you because I never knew the 40% of illegal immigration came from people that were overstaying their visas. There was a guy in my fraternity that he lives in Ireland now, but he was here for a couple of years and he had a really good job. The guy spoke like 7 languages. He was like one of the Boondock Saints, like one of the smartest people I've ever met. Super cool guy. And he ended up going back home. He was from Belgium, but he ended up residing in Ireland now, and he works there because his visa had expired and he couldn't stay. And it kind of blew my mind because this guy took school and work and everything so much more seriously than probably 95% of his peers, the people he's associating with every day. And he was quite frankly, more intelligent than a lot of them. So it seems just bizarre that you get rid of people, good people like that would really be a good benefit for almost any company to see a different approach. For example, like we had study hours, and he was a pledge in the fraternity at one time, and we would have so many study hours you were supposed to get, whether you were a new member pledge or an active member. So you would have to get, I think it was like 8 hours a week if you were a new member. and he would do them in like one day, and then be like, "Is there anything else I need to do? Like, what should I be doing?" And he's like, "Education is such a priority where I'm from that we spend 8 to 10 hours a day doing homework, learning new things. It's why he spoke so many languages, knew so much about history and so on." So it seems like there's a lot of things we could learn from, especially people that are driven enough to go through the legal process and come here to work and get a job and outperform a lot of the people that were born here and probably have the connections, which speaks volumes to their character and their abilities. So it seems like one of the things we touched on was that the court system is really backed up. And then you mentioned law school made me kind of think of this, but the rate at which lawyers are able to find jobs, or good paying jobs anyway, is rapidly declining. There's not much employment out there if you don't have, some kind of special skill or, some experience, maybe know someone before you came into law school. So it seems like a good common sense approach would be, instead of spending money on a border wall that's not going to stop 40% of the illegal immigrants, which is a crazy big number, is to build more courthouses and have more immigration judges. And then that opens up an entire new sector of the legal market. You have lawyers that can advocate for the illegal immigrants and help them through that process. And then you can employ more judges. And it just seems like that would be a much better use of our assets and something that would actually accomplish something.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. If when you ask what would be an approach that I would want to do, it would be exactly that. Because once you have the resources there, which immigration doesn't, you could really expedite these backlogged cases and be able to say, okay, this one stays, this one goes, because of this set law set in place. But the way it is now, it's just crazy. To give you an example, I worked for an immigration attorney in Arizona, and he was representing a lot of clients, the undocumented community that was wanting to take advantage of that cancellation, immigration benefit that we were just discussing. So they would essentially voluntarily put themselves into immigration proceedings. And just like that person who had that, small marijuana possession conviction, who came in from the airport and got served with essentially a notice to have a future court date. When the person goes through cancellation, they're voluntarily getting that document saying, okay, you're going to appear on X date. The problem is X date is 3 years from now. So within that process, it would be so long and so long and so long. And sometimes there would be continuances and continuances because the system's so backlogged. So what the judge would do with the filing of the attorney would be administratively closing the case, which is saying like, okay, well, we're super backlogged. We can't hear your case right now, but, you've demonstrated a prima facie case here. I haven't analyzed whether your extreme hardship is strong enough, but because you're not a criminal, because you've been here and you filled all the, elements, we're just going to basically administratively close your case, which doesn't get rid of it, but it kind of puts the immigrant in this limbo. It doesn't give them what they wanted, which was trying to get in that legal status. But on the positive, it does give them the work permit to be able to be here and work. But it's just this weird limbo. So if we had more judges, we could really get to the heart of the matter, whether you qualify for the program or you don't.
Yeah, and I definitely think it would solve a lot of problems, both for, like I said, American lawyers as well as people that are going through this whole process and trying to become American citizens. So I know another prong of this immigration issue is the whole sanctuary cities. And I've been to a few different presentations about the sanctuary cities. One of them was the Federalist Society. And so obviously that had more of a conservative view of the issue and sort of focused on the crime rates and things like that aren't being prosecuted and people that aren't being removed that are sort of committing crimes. And so I'm kind of curious to hear more of an objective, or what the original reasoning was for the sanctuary cities and how they function to, maybe assist some of the people that are in these limbo states or that maybe come here with a visa and then that expires and now they don't know what they're going to do.
Well, the thing with I think it's important to know, with immigration, it's civil. It's not criminal. Okay, so people who are those criminal immigrants, they have already gone through the established state process, right? Mm-hmm. So if they're out and about, that's because they've satisfied whatever the state wanted them to satisfy. They've served prison time or whatnot. And what the states are doing here, and Illinois actually has an act which was signed by Republican Governor Rauner. Essentially, it was to not cooperate with federal immigration, with enforcing federal immigration issues. And the reason by that, there's a couple of reasons. One is that in a case called Arizona versus United States, which was basically the stop and show me your papers case, the Supreme Court said that immigration is a federal issue. There's a lot of preemption arguments going on there. The state was trying to really meddle and create obstacles with it within federal immigration. And they said this is a strictly federal issue. Even when there is state assistance, it's through an agreement with the federal government, but there's still federal oversight as far as directing the states what they can and can't do. So this was the states basically saying, hey, you guys said in this case this is a strictly federal issue. We're just going to follow what you said. So this is your problem. You guys have to deal with the immigration issue. You said it was a strictly federal issue. Okay, then you guys have to deal with it. Another thing is, especially in Illinois, the reason why Governor Rauner signed it was not only the immigrant advocacy that went with it, but also the resources. You got to think about this, the amount of state resources that it takes to really, assist the feds with enforcing these immigration issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
It costs a lot of money. And frankly, you and I both know, being in a university in the state of Illinois, that there aren't an endless amount of resources within the state. And you see that in other states as well. California can be one. I mean, they obviously have a more pro-immigrant approach, sure, but also maybe people aren't considering the amount of state resources that it takes to really do what the feds want them to do.
So then I know Attorney General Sessions, his response to that, or one of the responses to that, was to sort of cut federal funding to states that or cities that are trying to do this. So do you think that, I don't know, I haven't looked at the numbers, but I wonder, more curious, if it offsets, if they stop getting federal funding for X activities, if they're saving money by not, actively searching for illegal immigrants or prosecuting them and so on. I wonder if there's any sort of middle ground where they don't get federal funding for some things and then they're saving it in other things.
Well, I think it's mostly it could be like a scare tactic, Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think if that was actually implemented, there could be some potential constitutional issues. There could be some potential other issues. I'm no expert in that field, but I think it's kind of used as a scare tactic. I don't know if the feds could particularly do that. I'm sure they could, but if that was the reasoning, I think that could open the door to potential litigation. Yeah,
and I think I'd be inclined to agree. I think Sessions just gets mad when the states do anything he doesn't agree with. Awesome. Well, really enjoyed talking with you today about the different issues here, and hopefully there'll be some new legislation, in the next, ideally the next few months, but we know it's probably going to be the next few years that maybe solve some of this, and we can have a conversation again about how much better things are doing.
I think it's going to be sooner than you think, honestly, because the whole DACA thing got over. I mean, the 6 month that Trump had given is coming up in March. So, I honestly, I think people are interested. They're going to see some new stuff soon. And I'm confident that DACA is going to be in legislation. I'm pretty confident about that. And I'm confident that there's going to be other things made. So we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. It's going to be exciting, but it's also kind of like, well, what's going to happen? So for those that want to be in immigration, this is going to kind of, create some changes. So it should be interesting to see what happens.
We will definitely be on the lookout for that. Thank you for coming on the show, Sean.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to How Is This Legal? If you enjoyed the show, help others find us by clicking the subscribe button, leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcast, and sharing this podcast with your family and friends. Come back next time to find out how is this legal?